The UK is moving onto a war footing, and Russia is the reason why. This isn't just about troops or weapons anymore. It's about preparing the entire country for conflict. Behind the scenes, a Cold War era plan is being revived, updated for modern warfare, and built to keep Britain functioning under sustained attack. It covers everything: infrastructure, supply chain, civilian response, and how the state operates when normal rules no longer apply. At the centre of it all is a document most people have never heard of: the Government War Book. This comprehensive document lays out exactly how the UK will deal with a new war against Russia. But not just for the nation's armed forces, it's a strategy for building resilience across the entire society. So let's take a look at what this secret plan is all about and how it fits into the growing preparations for war against Russia. The revival of the Government War Book was revealed by the UK's Defence Chief, Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton, at the London Defence Conference in April 2026. Asked in an interview about whether the UK was reviving the old Government War Book, he said, "I think that's right." He also described what that would look like. NATO describes the transition to conflict as a military component, but it also has a civilian component, the Defence Chief said. Civilians, he said, need to be aware that the relative peace the UK has enjoyed over the past 30 years is under increasing threat. During the Cold War, the UK considered its main threat to be a Russian invasion or full-scale nuclear war. But times have changed, and so have the threats. As Knighton explained, that requires us to educate ourselves and help the population understand some of those threats and help them understand what they can do to support the nation and potentially support the armed forces. That's exactly what the new war book is intended to do: build resilience across the whole of society so that the UK will be able to prevail in a new conflict with Russia. According to Knighton, the updated iteration draws on lessons from the Cold War, but in a modern context with a modern society with modern infrastructure. So what does this plan entail? Well, it's still being drawn up, and like its predecessors, it's likely to be highly classified. But we can get a good idea of the framework from previous iterations. The original war book emerged during the First World War and was maintained throughout the 20th century. The primary assumption throughout the Cold War period was that the main threat was an attack by the Soviet Union. Nothing's changed today, except the official name of the aggressor nation. Back in 2009, renowned British historian Peter Hennessy convinced UK authorities to give him access to a Cold War-era version of the plan. Hennessy, or to use his full title, Baron Hennessy of Nympsfield, FBA, has been the Attlee Professor of Contemporary British History at Queen Mary University of London since 2001. He also serves as a crossbench peer in the UK's House of Lords. Hennessy was amazed by the content, telling the BBC's Today programme that the surprise really is the width and magnitude of it. 16 chapters to get the nation from a peacetime footing to a total war footing. It's a remarkable enterprise. Over those 16 chapters, the document gives precise plans and instructions for the steps British officials would take, both during the build-up to a confrontation and after the bombs started falling. It covers these steps in mind-boggling detail, on the assumption that they need to be implemented with as little as 7 to 28 days' notice. According to the plans, the country would have been divided into 12 regions, each governed by cabinet ministers with wide powers. They would be aided by senior military officers, chief constables and judges, all based in bunkers. Other senior figures would have retreated to a central government shelter under the Cotswolds. From these protected positions, an entirely new system of local, regional and central government would be put in place. Parliament could vote on essentially abolishing itself, replacing the centralised democratic government with a series of regional commissioners. These were ministers who would have absolute control over one of the now devolved regions of the UK, including the power to approve death sentences. The volumes of the War Book and the archives at Kew also contain extensive files covering how to close motorways, how to draw up stockpiles of food, and how to put in place wartime broadcasting arrangements. The documents also describe in detail feeding arrangements, the necessity of maintaining large stockpiles of basic foods, and give guidance to farmers on how to protect their herds from radiation. Extensive supplies, stockpiles and facilities were to be put in place to support the transition to war. This included emergency feeding equipment to cover survivors, including basic foodstuffs held in 65 buffer depots nationwide. Most utility companies maintained war stocks. For example, British Telecom, or BT, had emergency depots containing stockpiles of cables and poles that could be used to re-establish communication networks. Many local BT exchanges also had on-site stores and food, as well as emergency bricks to build a temporary fallout shelter. These form part of an extensive and highly resilient communication infrastructure put in place across the UK. This infrastructure included hardened facilities, underground bunkers, microwave towers, and emergency networks designed to bypass nuclear-devastated cities. The plans even went as far as the removal of art treasures from London to Scotland, the emptying of hospitals of all but the most acutely ill, and blanket information control, aka censorship. Indeed, as a former civil servant, Sir David Omand, who was involved in the planning, recalls, "My favourite measure, the one which always aroused a lot of debate, was the introduction of censorship for private correspondence. You can imagine that was something that ministers would only agree to right at the very end when it was clear that the war was inevitable." We could go on and on. The attention to detail in the war book is truly astounding. Of course, as the nature of warfare and the threats faced by the UK evolved over the years, so did the war book. Regular exercises based on the book were held every 2 years by senior civil servants like Omand, bolstered by daily internal briefings and ongoing national preparedness schemes, such as the stockpiling of food and building materials for shelters. The process of maintaining, refining and implementing appropriate measures on the basis of the war book continued for decades. The measures in the war book became part of the everyday fabric of British life. And then, just like that, the Soviet Union crumbled, and the primary threat to the UK subsided into more or less irrelevance, and with it went the UK's focus on war preparedness. The headline numbers tell the tale. In the 1950s, government spending on public health amounted to around 3% of GDP. By 2020, it was around 12%. Conversely, defence spending fell from nearly 8% of GDP in the mid-1950s to roughly 2.3% today. The result? Well, from a military perspective, to use the phrase coined by current UK Defence Secretary John Healey and his predecessor Ben Wallace, the UK's armed forces have been hollowed out by years of underfunding. At the peak of its powers, the British Empire was the most powerful nation on the planet, a hegemon whose empire ruled over a quarter of the world's population and a quarter of its land area. The British Navy, the primary means of projecting power globally, was larger than the next two largest navies combined. The total size of the UK's regular armed forces in 1990 was roughly 305,000 to 311,000 personnel, not 150,000. Additionally, the force wasn't half the size of the 1980 force, which stood at around 327,000. It appears the script may have confused the size of the entire armed forces with that of the British Army alone, which was roughly 152,000 personnel in 1990. To be sure, the UK is still considered to be the sixth most powerful military in the world, behind the US, Russia, China, India, and South Korea. Its nuclear arsenal, large network of global bases, array of advanced weaponry, and enduring soft power mean that very few powers can compete despite its decline. Still, the numbers make unpleasant reading. In the 1980s, the army had more than 1,000 main battle tanks. Today, it has about 200, of which perhaps half are serviceable. For reference, Russia has already lost over 4,300 to date in Ukraine. The Royal Navy has taken a few verbal shots from President Donald Trump, who described its two aircraft carriers, HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Queen Elizabeth, as toys that are too old and don't work. UK Defence Minister Luke Pollard dismissed Trump's claim, saying, "No, we've got a strong Royal Navy." But Trump does have somewhat of a point. The Royal Navy is often said to have more admirals, 40, than warships, about 13. And although its two aircraft carriers are designed for 36 fighter jets, neither has carried more than 18 because of a shortage of suitable aircraft. Now, from the end of the Cold War up until early 2022, outside of certain minority circles, the hollowing out of the British Armed Forces was basically not much of a concern for the average Brit. Most seem quite happy with increased government spending on public health and other public services, even if that came at the cost of what was euphemistically described as a leaner military. After all, with a weakened Russia and the threat of terrorist attacks from Islamic jihadis largely contained, imminent threats to British security had all but vanished. The meticulous planning in the war books was put on a shelf to gather dust, and the very idea of cultivating wartime resilience largely disappeared from public and private discourse. The meticulous preparations, painstakingly compiled, rehearsed and revised over decades, had made the UK one of the nations best prepared for conflict. But it didn't matter anymore. Peacetime had arrived, and it was here to stay, or at least that's how it seemed. Then Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, and the Russian threat cast its ominous shadow over the British Isles once more. During the war, the UK has, of course, been one of Ukraine's most involved allies. From February 2022 until February 2026, the UK has pledged at least £21.8 billion to Ukraine, worth around $29.5 billion. Almost 60% of that, $17.6 billion, has been direct military aid, with a further $4.06 billion pledged annually until 2030-31, or for as long as it takes. The UK has also trained over 62,000 Ukrainian personnel in the UK under Operation Interflex. A landmark battlefield technology sharing agreement was signed in June 2025, and production of drones for Ukraine under joint ventures between Ukrainian and British companies is growing. A partnership between Ukrainian company Skyton and the UK's Prevail partners aims to scale up production of Skyton's battle-tested Raybird drone at Prevail's UK-based facilities. Meanwhile, mass production of Ukrainian Octopus 100 interceptor drones under another UK-Ukrainian joint venture called Project Octopus began in the UK in January 2026 at a new factory in Mildenhall. The facility, which is operated by the Ukrainian manufacturer Ukra Spec Systems UK, aims to produce thousands of drones per month. The first drones were sent to Ukraine for testing in January 2026, with successful flights reported. Now, tired of seeing the same stories and the same tired analysis on every military news channel? Well, here on The Military Show, we dig deeper, putting the stories into context and explaining why they matter. So, subscribe to the channel so you always understand exactly what's going on and why. Now, with the high level of military involvement we've just outlined, not to mention the mountain of diplomatic, financial and humanitarian support that the UK has provided to Ukraine, it's not surprising that the Russians have taken a rather dim view of it all. In fact, Russia's concerns about the UK seem to have slipped into outright paranoia. In the aftermath of Ukraine's audacious Operation Spiderweb in June 2025, Russia's ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kelin, accused the UK of being involved in organising the multi-pronged attack on Russian strategic airfields. In an interview with Sky News, he said that the success of the operation required access to high-tech geospatial data that only the United States and the United Kingdom possess. The US has denied involvement, he said, but the UK hadn't. We know very well how involved London is, how deeply British troops are involved in cooperation with Ukraine, he added. A few months later, Russia's SVR intelligence agency went a step further, claiming that the UK was the world's biggest warmonger and engaged in actively undermining Trump's attempts to negotiate peace. It's time to expose them and send a clear signal to the treacherous Albion and its elites. You will not succeed, they stated threateningly. Added to this increasingly aggressive Russian rhetoric are increasing reports of Russian grey warfare or hybrid warfare operations across Europe and in the UK. These include cyber attacks, economic pressure, disinformation campaigns, drone incursions, sabotage, and disruption of infrastructure. Most recently, the UK accused Russia of conducting a covert submarine operation threatening the UK's undersea cables and pipes. According to the British Secretary of State for Defence John Healey, the operation lasted over a month, although no cables were ultimately damaged. However, together with allies, the UK had tracked every mile of the deployment involving 3 Russian submarines, an Akula class and a pair of Main Directorate for Deep Sea Research or GUGI surveillance subs. Other than a satellite image of the 3 ships leaving Russia's Olenia port, purportedly heading for British waters, no hard evidence has been presented to support the claims. Russia dismissed the claim as impossible to either believe or verify, which apparently is precisely its purpose. Taken in isolation, they may have a point, but it's not an isolated incident. Incidents of potential or actual Russian sabotage of critical infrastructure, cyber attacks, drone incursions, and similar hybrid war provocations certainly appear to be on the increase. So you can see why a growing number of European and British officials have convinced themselves that once Russia is done in the Ukraine, it will turn its aggressive intentions towards NATO. And the warnings have become ever more frequent and stark as the war in Ukraine has developed. For example, General Sir Rowley Walker, Chief of the General Staff of the British Army, warned in May 2025 that the threat to NATO is real and emphasised a lack of time in preparing for future Russian aggression. Newly appointed head of British intelligence agency MI6, Blaise Metrawelli, described Russia as aggressive, expansionist and revisionist in her first public speech in December 2025, asserting that Putin seeks to subjugate Ukraine and harass NATO. Knighton himself stated in December 2025 that the situation is more dangerous than I've known during my career. He called for a whole-society approach to defence in the face of growing uncertainty and threats, highlighting an increased probability of Russia invading a NATO country. Now, the revitalisation of the war book pulls that call firmly into reality. The UK has already taken significant steps to overhaul its armed forces and bring them back to a state of wartime readiness as quickly as possible. Defence spending is on the rise. Sir Keir Starmer's government has committed to an increase to 2.7% of GDP by 2027, a total of around £270 billion or $365 billion. That will be followed by an increase to 3% in the next Parliament and 3.5% by 2035. A new national defence strategy has been unveiled, which highlights Russia as the UK's primary threat, and a critical 10-year defence investment plan is eagerly, or impatiently in many cases, awaited. On the military front, things are moving rapidly. But it's not just the military that needs to be geared up for war. War affects the entire country, government, business and ordinary people. And if the UK military is, by its own admission, not ready for war at this point, British society is even more unprepared. That's why the new war book is such an important step. It signals a fundamental change in posture, from defence to resilience. The difference has far-reaching implications. Defence is about trying to stop threats, while resilience assumes that some threats will land and focuses on absorbing and recovering from them. The war books of the Cold War era considered two main threats: nuclear war and an actual invasion of the UK by Russian forces. Measures to improve resilience were thus based around these threats. Today's war book must counter an entirely new range of threats, ranging from cyber warfare and severed undersea communication cables to attacks by long-range drone and missile swarms. According to Knighton, protecting critical national infrastructure such as power stations and water supplies will be central to the new approach. When we think about renewing our water infrastructure or electricity or transport infrastructure, we need to think about the threat of action from an adversary that's above the threshold of war, not just a hybrid threat, he said. That requires us to educate ourselves and help the population understand some of those threats and help them understand what they can do to support the nation and potentially support the armed forces, he added. But perhaps most telling is his remark that the process of building resilience requires making some different choices and different priorities. The statement suggests that resilience might involve some fundamental changes to life in the UK, including some that might be hard for many to swallow. It remains to be seen whether the new war book is quite as comprehensive as its predecessors. Perhaps AI and other modern technologies can streamline what was, by all accounts, a time-consuming and costly process. In addition to strengthening protection of critical infrastructure, the new plan is likely to involve increasing domestic production capacity, especially in defence and energy. Like in previous iterations of the war book, much greater coordination between industry and government will be required. More controversially, reserve and mobilisation frameworks will almost certainly need to be revised. Conscription may be considered, and perhaps most crucially, mass public awareness campaigns about national security risk will be required. Along with them, expect to see increasing information control and censorship, as Russia is currently discovering with massive public outrage over Moscow's blocking of the messenger app Telegram. Even in wartime, such measures don't tend to go down well. But perhaps the most crucial change is psychological. With the re-implementation of the war book, the UK isn't just preparing for war. In many senses, it's redefining what security means in the 21st century. Of course, the UK is far from alone in adjusting to the new multi-layered global threat environment. Countries like Sweden, Finland and Germany have published emergency preparedness guides, advising citizens to stockpile food, water and medicine. France is preparing to release a new 30-page civil defence manual, although officials insist it's not specifically related to war. Germany has also updated its emergency preparedness recommendations, advising people to stockpile 10 days' worth of essentials. Poland has built border barriers and introduced firearm training in schools. And countries like Lithuania and Estonia are conducting large-scale military and medical emergency exercises, preparing hospitals for wartime, and stockpiling critical medical supplies. While few seem to have gone as far as the UK's war book, the shift to a new model of defence posturing across Europe is clear. In this new model, war isn't an event but a condition. The front line isn't a place but a system. And the participants aren't just soldiers but the whole of society. And that changes everything, because once a nation changes its headspace in this way, it doesn't easily reverse. Now, if you're living in a large UK city, starting to panic about the imminent prospect of war with Russia, don't. Preparing for war doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. As the Latin maxim goes, si vis pacem, para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. It's not that the UK and the other European nations are starting to get serious about defence and resilience, expecting war imminently. At this point, there's as much evidence that the cacophony of warnings about an imminent Russian attack is motivated by lucrative defence procurement contracts as genuine Russian intent. War may be imminent, or it may not. What resilience-enhancing moves, like the dusting off of the war book, really signal is that the UK no longer assumes that peace is stable and reliable. Given the growing tensions and military flare-ups around the world, it would be naive to assume otherwise. And when a nation, especially as one as powerful as the UK, stops assuming stability, it starts behaving differently. It starts building resilience, systematically and at scale. The reintroduction of the war book indicates that the UK is emerging strongly from decades of military slumber. No wonder the Russians are in such a flap. Now, for more details on how that resilience is being built into the UK's defence forces, check out this video next. And thanks for watching.